Welcome back, everyone. This is our AI Tech Talk Live. Today, we will be focusing very specifically on facial recognition, and we'll look at some of the human rights and ethical issues that relates to facial recognition. We got a bunch of questions from few people, and I have divided those questions into three different groups, and I will answer each one of the groups separately. So the first is on facial recognition and the human rights. The second is related to using facial recognition in for-profit companies, and the third is on use of facial recognition in government agencies. And just as a background, before we go deeper into that, most of the facial recognition, actually pretty much every facial recognition software is based on some sort of artificial intelligence. There are some new novel ones that are actually much more accurate, that's based on algorithms like deep learning. There are some older ones that uses a combination of different techniques. Some are pre-built, some actually evolve as we go on, as they get more data. That's the state of art, and that's also what we try to cover in these AI Tech Talks Live, where we try to come up with topics that relates to artificial intelligence, general use in society. And today it's facial recognition. So let's move right into it. The first is about facial recognition and UN human right considerations. For anyone who don't know much about UN Declaration of Human Rights, very quick crash course on Article 7 of Declaration of UN Declaration of Human Rights. It states that all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination or to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination and violence of the declaration and against any inclination to such discrimination. And that forms the basis of human rights. There are different variations of this that are taken up by different countries like the US or the UK or some of the Asian countries. But more or less it remains the same, that there should not be any discrimination of any sort. And it's actually a human right. Some countries do not follow that, and some countries do. That's where facial recognition comes into picture, where facial recognition can lead to discriminatory behavior, either because of the technology itself or because it's used in a way it should not be used. So in the first side, we all know that some of these facial recognition technologies are not perfect. AI, for example, facial recognition systems that are built using AI have shown to have issues when it comes to recognizing certain faces, or certain genders, or certain races. And that has been one of the big issues with artificial intelligence generally, and specifically on facial recognition, is the data that these systems are trained on. And if this data is not sufficient or is not policed in the right way, you come to a situation where you build these AI models for facial recognition that is not descriptive of every possible gender or race. And that leads to undue discrimination. So you can think about facial recognition system being used on a social media platform where it's trying to recognize people, and based on things like who you are, where you are from, your race or sex, it recommends you things which may actually be discriminatory because it may have known your race, for example, using facial recognition. That's one. The other aspect is that whether something like let's say what you should be buying should be based on who you are as a person, and hence the ads that's actually tailored to you. Other examples would be when you're trying to get insurance. Will that be whether that should be determined based on who you are? Probably to some extent, because it does take you do want let's say a car insurance dealer may want to think about how how your driving history is, but that should be it. Our second question relates to the use of facial recognition by for-profit companies. And specifically, we will take an example about ClearView. For people who don't know what ClearView is, it is a startup from the US which was using troves of images of you and who you are from other social media. So, for example, from Facebook, from LinkedIn, from various other channels that was publicly available, and they were running facial recognition on top of it, and then trying to come up with a database. So, if and their business model was very simple, they will sell this data, sell this facial recognition technology that's been trained and these loads and loads of your images with your name on it to businesses, either for profit or non-profit. For profit would be somebody who wants to build a better system to recognize who you are, who's entering a premise. Non-profit could be government agencies, it could be for law enforcement. So that's what their business model was. Now, the question here is not a technology. The question here is about ethics. Yes, from a technology perspective, you can build a facial recognition system which takes in a lot of images from various sources, and it's able to do a phenomenal job in facial recognition. But the question is, do you actually have the rights to those images? That's a legal question, and I'm not a lawyer, but from a plain ethics perspective, that's not what the expectation is when we put our photos on Facebook or on LinkedIn, or when we are sharing a album on the internet about us, about our friends and families. And that was the issue about ClearView. The ClearView were also selling it to other government agencies who were using it for law enforcement. And that's where the trouble began. And most recently, a couple of months back, the Canadian government actually started an investigation about ClearView AI. And they declared that ClearView's actions were illegal within the Canada, and it ordered the company to cease operation within the country and to remove all Canadian citizens from the database. I believe something of this sort will happen here in the US as well. And a lot of the social media giants also were against it. Yes, your Facebook photo, profile photo is publicly available, but that's not the intended goal of that Facebook photo when you put your photo there, or on LinkedIn in that example. And ClearView is not just one of the startups. So there are many, many more out there that are doing something similar. And the whole question is yes, the technology can do it, but should they be doing it? And the answer is clearly no. It also relates to the UN human rights consideration about what our rights are as citizens of this planet. Our third question is about the use of facial recognition by nonprofits and government agencies. We'll talk a little bit about one of the very interesting examples from the UK, where a AI-based facial recognition software was being used in a stadium by South Wales Police. This case, and it was called the Bridge versus South Wales Police, was related to the lawfulness of the use of facial recognition technology to screen against a watch list of a wanted person in police database at football matches at Cardiff football grounds. On appeal, the English court or appeal held that the use of facial recognition by South Wales Police was unlawful and did not comply with Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights. And you can think about the European Convention of Human Rights similar to the UN Declaration. It sounds very similar. It relates to the right to respect for privacy and family life. That just because you could put up a video camera there or have somebody recognize you by photo doesn't mean you can actually do that. These things are much more these privacy issues are much more closely looked in Europe, although not that much here in the US. Well, at least not yet. So the court did not rule out facial recognition technology as such, but held that both the data protection impact assessment and the equality impact assessment carried out by South Wales Police was inadequate. In other words, the court said that the police can use facial recognition as long as they could convince the citizens that the technology being used will not be discriminatory. And we all know as technologists that facial recognition is discriminatory. It works well on certain kind of images. For example, people with darker skins are not recognized that much. There have been cases here in the US as well. Dallas was a good example a couple of weeks back. And in all these cases, the issue is that facial recognition technology is not perfect. It can lead to discrimination. And that was the basis. So the code did not say correctly, actually, that you cannot use a facial recognition technology, but you better convince that it is accurate and it will not do harm to people because of the use of it. And I think that's the bottom line, that just because it's technologically possible today, pretty much in any technology you cannot be 100% sure. And sometimes it's better not to be using the technology. And facial recognition is a great example. Instead of trying to build something that's 100% accurate, when you know that these systems, facial recognition being one of them, built using artificial intelligence, are not deterministic systems. They are probabilistic systems. So there is no way you could have 100% guarantee. There is no guarantee. With this, we come to the end of this talk. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is aditya@skive.it. You will find that on LinkedIn, Facebook. We are also live on Clubhouse. As a reminder, we are part of Robometrics Machines and Skive in London and San Francisco. We are absolutely, certainly hiring. We are an AI startup building machines that feel. So we love to hear from you. Thanks, and I'll till next week.